Hello. This year marks the 100th anniversary since the initial publication in 1925 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I first read this book when I was a teenager, like a lot of people do, I think, because it's often on school assigned reading lists. Although I didn't read it then for that reason, but because I loved books. And it is considered by many to be one of the greatest novels of all time. The Modern Library created a list of their 100 greatest novels, and it was number 2 on that list, just after Ulysses by James Joyce. And Time Magazine created a list of the 100 greatest novels in English, and it was in the top of that. And any discussion surrounding the great American novel, this book will inevitably be referenced. But when I first read this book as a teenager, I have to confess, I had a fairly muted response to it, but I've just reread this book, so I want to contrast my reading experience of now to then and discuss why I'm still glad that I read this when I was a teenager, even though I felt like I didn't get all that much out of it at that time. Now, I'm slightly ashamed that my edition of this book is the now a major motion picture version of it, although the Baz Luhrmann film of this I think is fine, but yeah, I just don't really like having this sort of edition, but it's just the one I've kind of ended up with. So before I get into talking about the content of this book, I want to show off a much fancier and bigger and interesting version of this book, which is the manuscript version of this novel. And it is so fascinating looking through this copy of F. Scott Fitzgerald's actual manuscript of the book and seeing his handwriting and all of the things that have been crossed out. I mean, I love just seeing sort of the energy of his writing, but it's also really fascinating how so much of the book is just there, that he's just put out. I mean, so he'll frequently cross out things, but then quite often he will immediately start rewriting that initial scene that he was writing and just use slightly different words. And so I think that was really impressive. And it's really interesting to see that in a number of sections, especially towards the beginning, he begins with this line of the summer really began when blank, 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 but he crosses that out. And so there's this sense in his manuscript that he really wanted to get into the meat of this story and its plot, but he kept going back to give all this background information about the narrator Nick and his relationship to the other characters he was observing. And one of the other interesting things about this I want to point out before getting on to the book is that in the later sections of this manuscript, when there is he was obviously writing on a typewriter, he initially called J. Gatsby his original name. He first called him James Gatty, but then he changed it, as you can see in the margins of this, to Gats rather than Gaddy. So when later on we meet the father of Jay Gatsby and learn more about his character, that's what his father's surname is Gats rather than Gaddy. And I just think that's a funny little detail. So this novel and this story, I mean, it's fairly central, easy to summarize the central plot of this novel. So we follow a character, Nick, who moves to the east coast of the United States in New York to this upscale residential area. He sells bonds, and we follow him in his observations of his neighbor of Jay Gatsby, who has this incredible residence in which he throws lavish parties, and this is in the jazz age of the early 1920s. So Prohibition is going on, and we follow him as he makes observations about Gatsby, but also his cousin Daisy, and the love triangle of Daisy and her husband Tom and Gatsby, who is her former lover. And so there's the tension in the story of who will Daisy choose to be with romantically, and there is the mystery surrounding Gatsby himself. He is someone who has a whole mythology around him. There's questions about where his wealth came from and his position and his background, and these questions sort of swirl around his parties, these lavish parties that he throws, and so there's the mystery of his story, which we eventually find out, and then there is the plot itself, how this all plays out throughout the story in a very dramatic way. And when it gets to the climax of the story and this great tragic incident, I was really shocked by the brutality of that, because part of my new appreciation of this book is just in the language which is used, which is so beautiful and ornate, and when it gets to that section and this incredibly brutal detail of this accident which occurs, I was really taken aback and surprised by it, and so I think partly when I was a teenager I just didn't fully appreciate how beautiful and gorgeous the language was. I mean, I think I did sort of appreciate it on a slightly surface level, but just the use of metaphor, the descriptions of the atmosphere and the psychological insight of the characters, but also in the language of the dialogue which is used. There is so much witty language used in this, which I really appreciated at this stage. And I think part of my initial resistance to this story was it felt like all of the characters, except maybe the narrator, they're all quite superficial. They are all very self-obsessed, and these just felt like characters that, like, why should I care about these characters when they are so superficial in this way. But I've appreciated much more now the drama of this story and the presentation of these characters as both an embodiment of this particular place and time in America, but also as figures, as complicated, but also figures that are superficial on the surface, but also quite complicated underneath in their motivations and desires, and especially of Gatsby himself as someone who has spent his entire life yearning for this romance and wanting to regain this romance that he had with Daisy. And really, he's built up his entire life for this reason. He's built up this whole mythology and amassed all of this wealth just to impress her and to try to win her back as a lover. And there's a particular line in this book where it says something along the lines of that a man can spend his entire life just for this central goal of trying to fulfill this romantic yearning and direct all of his energies to realize this. And that's something that I think my teenage self didn't fully appreciate, how we can carry throughout our lives these dreams and ideals, and they can really shape a lot of our life decisions. Now, the consequences of those life decisions, they might lead to other hopes and ideals and realizing things about our lives, but at the same time, we can maintain within ourselves this sense that, oh, if only I could get with this person, then I would be perfectly fulfilled in my life. Or if I achieved a certain level of wealth or fame or whatever it is, then, I will be fully satisfied. And that can direct so many of our motivations. But as life is lived, and as we go through different experiences, we find that both the experience of life and fulfilling our goals are much more complicated and nuanced than they are on the surface, and that is partly the great tragedy of Gatsby. He never really gets past this ideal that he creates for himself in his mind, and that is so beautifully embodied in the symbolism of this novel, of the green light on the distant shore that he's striving for, that represents Daisy, but also represents a life beyond what he has and what he is born into. And also, I appreciated this so much more, and why I think it's considered one of the great American novels is that it embodies so much about the American experience of this sense that we can entirely create ourselves from scratch. We can be whatever we want to be, and Gatsby is totally an embodiment of that. But the other side of that coin is to that American dream is the corruption, which so often goes along with the attempt to realize this dream, and there are also so many dark things in this book, like Tom, Daisy's husband. He is a white supremacist. He has these kind of traditionally masculine and domineering characteristics to his personality, and he's really a vile person, but at the same time I can understand why Daisy is drawn to him and the security of him, and even though there doesn't seem to be much genuine love there between them, it's sort of understandable that her character would still want to remain with him as her husband, and so when she is presented with the possibility of being with Gatsby, of her former lover, this becomes a really tense source of conflict, and I found myself really gripped by this. And because it had been so long since I'd read this book or seen any kind of film adaptation of it, or theatrical adaptation of it, I kind of forgot how, I mean, I knew ultimately how the story played out, but the details of how it plays out, I couldn't really remember, and so I was really drawn into the plot of this story, but also appreciating it for its depiction of its characters, rather than in spite of them, because when I was a teenager I was so off-put by these characters, but reading about these many different high-class monsters now, I appreciated them a lot more, but then also appreciated the larger themes of the book, but also its style and the quality of its writing, which is just gorgeous and beautiful, and so yeah, I appreciated this book so much more now, and I'm glad that I finally revisited it, because I was kind of resistant to it for so long, because when I read it as a teenager, I was just sort of like, had a bit of a shrug and thought, oh, so what? And but now, yeah, I do appreciate it so much more. I don't know if I would classify it as one of my favorite books of all time, but I absolutely understand why it's a modern classic and why it is so revered. So if you have read this book or reread this book, I would love to hear your thoughts and impressions about it, or if you've never read it or experienced it before, I'd be really keen to hear if you're interested in reading it, if you're eager to read it, and if you do go read it, please come back and let me know what you made of it. But thank you for watching me discuss one of the great American classics, the great American novels, and I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.